Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniegolu, and tonight, as with every day and night, we ditch the spin and deliver an unvarnished review of the week's major national and international news stories with our guest commentators. It was a week in which the dominant domestic story here in Nigeria was President Tinubu's decision to reshuffle his cabinet, firing 6, reassigning 10, and bringing in 7 new ministers. And on the international scene, with less than 2 weeks to go before the US presidential election, Kamala Harris for the Democrats and Donald Trump for the Republicans are working flat out to try to gain as much momentum as possible ahead of the November the 4th ballot. Ms. Harris is currently campaigning at an event in Houston where Beyoncé is set to appear. And Mr. Trump is currently visiting Austin, where he's recording an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, which is the biggest podcast in the US. Well, for their take on these and other developments, I'm joined now by 2 very well-informed guest communicators, commentators, and they are Mahmud Jega, who is an Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and Kenny Okolugbo, who is a current affairs analyst, political and communications consultant, and a former commissioner in Delta State. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We haven't seen
it's always my pleasure. I haven't seen you in a while.
I was going to say, I haven't seen you in a while, so it's absolutely brilliant to have you here. Let me start with you, Mahmud. How much has this new cabinet, I don't know if I should call it a new cabinet, but this reshuffled cabinet captured your imagination? I suppose that says it all then, doesn't it?
There was a time the Prime Minister of Italy reshuffled his cabinet after 2 weeks, and the newspaper headline said, "The Prime Minister has a new cabinet, his old one." Because everybody went back to the same
I like that, that's
post.
brilliant.
It's not what happened here anyway, but you see, there was a lot of expectation about what was about to happen. The president even went on holiday to consider it very well. But honestly, from the commentaries that you are seeing and the reactions, it looks like, people thought it was underwhelming, maybe to use that word. The presidency rolled many things into one. I think the statement said, in order to invigorate the government, they did 8 things. Sacked some ministers, reassigned some, appointed some new
merged
some ministries, dissolved some ministries, and appointed, I think, chairman of some. And then one ministry, the Ministry of Niger Delta, was refashioned to be Ministry of Regional Development. That one appeared to me to make some sense because you have now got at least 4 of these regional development. So to have one agency, one ministry coordinating them, it looks to me to have made a lot of sense. But the problem with the cabinet changes was that the ministers are affected were some of the most low-key ones. I think among the ones that were removed, probably only the Minister of Education, you can say, was important in the kind of portfolio. High profile because of the portfolio.
Okay.
And then so many ministers of state. Honestly, some of them, I was hearing their names for the first time, were moved. And also, most of the ministers that were brought in also had very little media presence. I'm not saying that is bad in itself, but you can see you don't know what to say when you don't know a person's antecedents.
Well, I mean, it was partly Hadiza Bala Usman's reports that, and from what we were told, it was those reports emanated from interactions with the public. So it is possible that they said, "Well, do you recognize this person?" Like, who is this? I mean, But let me come to you, Kenny. Good to see you again. I mean, has this new cabinet imbued you with energy and enthusiasm, or is it not likely to, as far as you're concerned, translate into anything?
But you remember the last time I was here was scoring the ministers and actually talking about
the fact that
my co-panelists then were like, well, if Ken was talking about only 2, 3, 4 ministers, that means that there needed to be a change. But no matter the way you look at it in terms of perspective, the president has done something that is novel. Nobody has actually, if correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 1 year, rejigged his cabinet in 1 year and accept the fact that you have performance index. Apart from maybe Ohanaye, I thought you're not very sure the Minister of Women Affairs. She's been everywhere. Maybe for good or for bad. But let's be fair to her.
Public profile.
She had a public profile.
But the question is, what kind of profile?
You might say it might not have been good, it might not have been bad, but some liked her for who she was, and some would actually miss her. But you see, there was a performance index, and the performance index was done by Hadiza Bala Yusuf. And we are not there to see what the performance index was. I singled out in that program, I singled out Umahi, I singled out Wike, because those were the ones that are very obviously doing so well.
Right.
And some could also argue that the minister from my state, aviation, is also doing very well. And so it depends on
Festus
Keyamo.
Right.
So it depends on the parameters you want to look at it. But if you look at what the president did, he removed John Eno from sports because he realized that John Eno didn't do well in sports. And if you look at the DECO guide that has been taken to the National Sports Commission, it makes a whole lot of sense. They look at the Ministry of Regional Affairs. The Senate has done very well. The Senate has passed 3 commissions in this 10th Senate. The Southeast Development Commission, the Southwest Development Commission, the Northwest Development Commission. And don't forget that we have already had the Northeast Development Commission under Buhari. And the South-South Development Commission is going for its 3rd reading. So that means it's on its way to being passed. Yes, a couple of people have kicked against the fact that the Niger Delta Ministry was created by Yaradua, basically to take care of the Niger Delta area. But don't forget that the Niger Delta area you're talking of has Imo, Abia, and Ondo added to the 6 states of the South-South. That's why the 6 states of the South-South also said, look, we want our own development commission. So now having all of them warehoused into the Ministry of Regional Development clearly tells you that the minister still has a whole lot to do in terms of policing the commissions. He's going to act as a check and balance to the CEOs of those commissions and to ensure that their developmental projects get to the grassroots. Because the whole idea of getting these commissions is to get developmental projects to these zones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because these are geopolitical zones, you must say. And if you also look at the woman that he has brought, the Jumoke lady, she has been a senior special assistant on industries and trade. And so she has had that experience in the last dispensation. And now she's a special advisor to the president under the vice president's office. It also has to do with trade and industry. And so you might say that's a square peg in a square hole. If you look at Bianca Ono, she has been the ambassador to Spain. You can say it's a square peg in a square hole, even though the Easterners are complaining that they removed Ohanaye, who was a grade A minister
and then put a junior minister
Put a junior minister, and so they are not happy with it. But no matter how you look at it, you can't satisfy.
So you're happy with? I think it's fairly okay.
Exactly with the 10 new reshufflings.
Right, the reassignments.
Yes,
okay. Let me come to you,
I don't think
Mahmud,
it's actually
because he made a point, and I would be very keen to get your take on that. He made a point about the former governors who are in the cabinet and how they're performing. Somebody noted that none of the former governors were sacked or their positions reassigned or anything like that. Is it because, in your assessment, they're doing really well, or is there some other reason why they were spared? Because somebody from the National Assembly, I won't mention the name, said to me that the reason why he thinks they were spared is because they would be of use in a re-election campaign, having had that kind of reach across their states in 2027.
They are there to begin with because they were useful in the last election campaign, so they could as well be very useful in the next election campaign. But you see, I also didn't see Hadiza Bala Usman's scorecard. Or for that matter, the parameters, because if, for example, the parameters had been made public, that, okay, we are going to assess all the ministers on this. Yeah, I mean, I was a teacher before to university, and before you start marking, you must have a marking scheme.
Yeah.
If you don't have a marking scheme, how do you really
score your students?
This or that? So if, for example, you want to be completely transparent, the public could be told what is the marking scheme, and the public could also get involved in the assessment
well, they
process.
claim they use the public, but I mean, we don't know, because
exactly.
I mean, we're all members of the public,
Yeah,
but
but,
nobody
uh,
came to talk to us.
Maybe we could call for the release of the parameters she used, because she said it's
Yeah, well, there's a
she's not-
freedom
she's
of
not going to
information
hide,
thing,
yeah.
isn't there?
And to be
under
frank,
which we could call for it.
the president has absolute prerogatives in this matter.
Yeah.
You could remove you even
fire.
without a reason, or it could be because of one small thing that
Yeah,
you did.
but I agree with you. But the fact is that they said, the presidency said, that in spite of those powers, the reasons the president used was
because
that,
of-
that assessment.
You
that,
see,
Hadiza
they
Bala was
didn't
mandate.
take apparently into consideration all the concerns of the public. For example, the size of the cabinet was an issue since last year.
Absolutely.
People said this is the largest cabinet since independence. So if you are going to do some rejigging, people expected possibly a reduction in the number of ministers. I don't know whether there was actually an increase, because 5 ministers were sacked and 7 new ones were.
Well, actually, they said
six.
six.
I don't think there was an
It's
increase.
6
Don't forget
now.
that
there were some that were hanging.
Yes, they had not replaced Lalong. They had not replaced Lalong.
And also the Minister of Humanitarian.
But they didn't bring any other
affairs.
person from Cross River, so I think most likely Cross River lost
Yeah.
because Cross River had 2 people.
Right.
Before,
Well, let me come to you,
Yeah.
Kenny, before we move on to talk about something else. I mean, are you surprised? Because, I mean, you mentioned that generally you're happy with what has happened with the...
Yes, in the sense
The
that I'm
reshuffle and so
looking at square pegs in square hole.
Right.
And again, it's like when I
No,
was...
no, let me ask you
Yes.
this question.
Okay.
Are you surprised, because this was raised here in the studio not long ago, are you surprised that people like the Minister of State for Defense, Bello Matawalle, who was accused by his own governor, as well as Boko Haram leaders, of sponsoring the militant group, escaped the sack? And in fact, there was no... he didn't come up at all.
No, Matawalle had that scandal even before he was appointed. But, it's an allegation. The National Security Advisor has not brought any report on this. It's still an allegation. In the realms of the fact that it's still an allegation, it becomes very difficult for you to say you should use that basis to remove him. Don't forget again that the president is privy to security reports that we are not privy to. So most likely the security report the president has been given might not have found him culpable.
Because I don't
expect...
said clearly that
Yes.
the National Security Advisor said that this was not true.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. Because if the National Security Advisor, whose purview is to give a definite statement on such weighty allegations and says it's not true, it becomes very difficult for the president to act on that. Don't also forget that there were other ministers that a lot of accusations have been made on, and maybe some we are also sent to the EFCC for clearance, which we might not have known. So these are situation reports that the president gets every now and then, and he looks at them and decides that, look, I cannot act on this one. But look, knowing who Tinubu is, I think if Matawalle had such very weighty allegations and it was true, I doubt if he will still leave him in his cabinet.
Well, I mean, what you would have expected, which has happened with other ministers, is that, he would say, well, you're suspended while an investigation, because these are pretty weighty allegations.
Maybe
from
because
someone
I agree
like
with you,
his
but maybe
governor,
the National Security
group,
Advisor has also made available the reports to him.
Right.
But then again, don't forget that the ministers are on their toes now. They now realize that, look, there's a head mistress, Hadiza, who has who has a whip. Do you understand where I'm coming from? To actually give her report on your performance.
Right.
And don't forget again, one of the things that the president wasn't happy about was that they were not speaking about what they do. Media is very important. Some of these ministers were shy to go to the media to say, blow your trumpet. That's why I like the Minister of Aviation. Maybe because he has a whole lot of background in the media. But a lot of people still complain about the price of tickets being very high. But he's been able to worm his way to the airline providers.
Right.
And Nigerians can see he's actually making an effort despite the high prices of the tickets.
I think the bottom line in the final analysis is that we'll just have to watch and see how
Just
they
1
act.
minute.
Very briefly.
Very
yes.
briefly, Oga Charles, you see some of the sectors of the greatest concern to the public were apparently not touched in this reshuffle. Cost of living,
Absolutely.
food production,
Yep.
the petroleum industry, which
Minimum wage.
unfortunately the president himself is
the minister
of petroleum. Then all the economic thing about the naira, and all that.
Yeah.
So all those key areas were actually not touched. Instead, it is the peripheral areas.
I agree.
Like youth.
And that's a very fundamental point to make. So let me ask you this, and then because I'm asking you first because there's a particular question I want to ask you. Let's move to the United States of America. A very consequential election less than 2 weeks away. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Lots of big names, lots of celebrity endorsements for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump also has people like Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, I think, who has the biggest, the most listened to podcast across America and all the rest of it. Are those celebrity endorsements likely to make a difference? I mean, in an election like this, has it made differences in the past, or is it just a good way to kind of raise a lot of things? I mean,
during the campaign, the long campaign, endorsements by mega stars and big politicians. Endorsement is very important in American politics. Throughout the campaign period, you see former presidents, senators, governors, everybody saying, I have endorsed.
Well, you're not seeing former presidents coming out for Donald Trump, though.
I don't think there's any former president around who will want Donald Trump back. Yeah, well, but right now, what the opinion polls are suggesting is that there are very few people left who will determine the outcome of the election, and not even throughout the country. A few thousand people left in 6 or 7, what they call battleground states. If you can get those. So I'm surprised, for example, that Kamala Harris went to Texas to do this, although it will be broadcast all over the country. But Texas is not one of the battleground states. It is a deep red state, has not voted for the Democrats in a very long time. But that's okay. They do a lot of calculations and polling and all that before they do. But right now, all effort is to get the few remaining undecided voters in the battleground states to swing to their side. You know, many Nigerians are confused about the American election system. Because it's like the only place where you can get the highest number of votes and lose the election. I remember I saw a South Korean journalist the last time saying, this is wonderful. How can you get the highest votes and lose the election? It's about the only place in the world. But they have their own
no, absolutely. Very briefly, because we're almost out of time, unfortunately. The polls are giving, I bet you're glad to hear this, Mr. Trump a very slight lead. For instance, the Financial Times poll put him at 44% and put Kamala Harris at 43%. The same thing with the Economist poll and a few others. But that could all turn out to be statistically insignificant. But what are your thoughts on that before we have to go?
If CNN could come up with 47, which is the last poll, it clearly shows you, and you know, Trump underperforms his polling. Well, I think the problem Kamala Harris have had, don't get me wrong, forget the fact that you think I'm excited because of that polling. Kamala Harris has been the architect of our own problem, because when she had the CNN town hall yesterday, Anderson Cooper gave her a whole lot of opportunities to correct most of the mistakes she has made, saying like she was going to do the same thing about the border crisis. She was going to rely on the border legislative bill, which has been proven to be one that you need a filibuster for it to be able to be passed. They gave us so many opportunities to correct those mistakes, but she didn't correct them. Remember what they said, that her words were, David Axelrod is a core Democrat, that was a senior advisor to Barack Obama. He said what she was always using was the word salad. And they were all not impressed. Even Jake Tapper, that is a
I could tell you a few things they're saying about Donald Trump.
Why I'm saying this is CNN, it's seen to be leaning Democrat. So I think it is very clear. Donald Trump is going to win those elections.
There's no certainty.
Let's not even go there.
Remember when I told you inflation was 25%, you argued that with me. Because I didn't say it was general, but now you agree with me that there are certain goods in America that is still 50%. I think that he has never been this popular until lately now. And that is because of hunger. in America. $100 cannot buy you grocery
Okay.
anymore.
He is
So
not-
they're not
let
not looking at the stars
right.
anymore.
We've got about a minute
others
to go. Let me
endorsing
give
Kamala
Mahmud
will
Jega
not-
the final
He
word
is not
on
popular. He has a much higher disapproval rating than approval rating.
Absolutely.
Anyway, all that Kamala Harris has to do to win this election is to hold the blue wall states.
Yeah.
If she could win Wisconsin, Michigan, and
Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania,
she's the next
she's
president
in
of
the,
America.
she's in the White House.
On that note, I knew it was a great idea to bring both of you here. Very, very interesting.
He's obviously Democrat. Maybe I'm leaning. I'm leaning Republican. I'm leaning
You may be
Republican.
Republican. Anyway, listen, thank you very much indeed.
It's my
Mahmud
pleasure.
Jega, of course, is an Arise News analyst, former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and Kenny Okolugbo is a current affairs analyst, political and communications consultant, and a former commissioner in Delta State. Great to talk with you.
Always my pleasure.